So even Gramsci scholars have not paid attention to his notes on religion. Those who worked on hegemony, civil society, political party, language, culture, then economics, philosophy, education, subaltern studies, even international relations, have paid any attention to his theory of religion. In fact, most of these projects of Ramsey, like ideology, hegemony, common sense, traditional intellectual formation, passive revolution, intellectual and moral reformation, they're all developed by Ramsey in context of religion, history of religion, especially history of Catholicity. That is very important for Ramsey. And unfortunately, that has not been researched by Ramsian scholars who apparently claim to have a secular theory. They have not paid attention to Ramsey's conception of religion. Yeah, most of the concepts Ramsey develops in the context of Catholicism or Catholic religion or history of Christianity in the medieval era. And most of the concepts he has developed, in common sense, if you recall his chapters, he pays attention to religious common sense of various people. So therefore, religious common sense is not even used by scholars. Therefore, in fact, one commentator called Francis published a book on Ramsey in 2009. He says this book will be of interest to students and scholars of political philosophy, economics, film, media studies, sociology, education, literature, post-colonial studies, anthropology, subaltern studies, cultural studies, linguistic, and international relations. So what is absent here is religious study. He has identified almost everything except religious studies. Now, this is not with Francis only. Almost all books on Ramsey, you will find less discussion, almost marginal discussion of religion. That is because the most of the Marxist intellectuals who claim to be atheist and secular quote unquote, have paid less attention to religion, and they think that religion doesn't provide interesting signposts of knowledge. Religion is mythological, mystical, superstitious, and therefore should be kept out of discussion. With that bias, if you study Gramsci, you will not understand Gramsci's theory of religion. Who approach religion as a superstitious phenomena and try to understand okay. When is exam? Intervacation. Okay, I would inform them.
Yeah, I have called the C officer, sir.
Okay.
Present because this is the madam. There is no change in this.
Okay. Thank you. So, the announcement by the, please note down the dates. Semester exam, say classes will continue up to 20 November 2020. Classes will continue up to 20 November 2020. Okay, first one. Second, exam will start from 23rd November to 30 November, and 1st December to 4th December. So roughly 23rd November to 4th December. Exams will be exam and evaluation both. Then winter vacation from 5th December to 3rd January. And winter semester teaching schedule starts from 4th January 2020. I hope vaccination will come before that. We can meet. I'm finding a whole climate very oppressive. The winter semester teaching schedule from 4th January to till 12th May. 4th January till 12th May 2020. So teaching will continue up to 12th May 2020. Exam will start from 13th May till 20th May 2020. So this is the current thing. It may be revised, but most probably the academic calendar for you will remain because your teaching has started late. Therefore, similarly, I think the academic calendar for the next batch, the fresh batch, will not be same as your batch. That will again vary. But I don't know whether university will be able to synchronize these two things. I doubt because new batch will join from 1st November. By then, your semester will be almost over. So you have only few days left to that. Therefore, your timetable will not be able to synchronize with their timetable. They will have two different time academic calendar for your batch and the next batch. So please note down all this, and we will also keep a watch on this and proceed further. Okay. So therefore, what you find is in most of the Gramsci scholars have see a lot of literature has evolved around Gramsci. And Perry Anderson says that so far as the Gramsci writings are concerned and commentaries on Gramsci are concerned, they exceeded even commentaries on Machiavelli over a long period of time. So Gramsci has outsmarted even his favorite philosopher Machiavelli in the world literature. Yet you find very few books on his religious studies. And despite the fact that Gramsci has worked out his concepts by decoding, deconstructing Christianity, Catholicism, and so on and so forth, made a history of Christianity in Europe. Gramscian scholars have not paid attention, partly because, as I said, they assume that religion is a superstitious dogma and nothing to be learned from it. For Gramsci, as I told you in the first class, religion is not purely about superstition. Is about superstition, but superstition is one aspect of religion. There are many more aspects of religion. Religion is a set of ethics. Religion provides source for ideology. Religions provide source for hegemony. Religion provides intellectual resource as well. Therefore, religion is a moral intellectual domain, and many intellectuals are formed in the religious setting, and they preach ethics, they practice ethical questions from their civilization point of view. Therefore, to brush aside everything as superstitious is to have a reductionist and narrow view of religion. Gramsci was very clear from several of writings, it comes back to it. Yet you don't find people using this his repertoire of ideas around religion. As I told you, he has written about 400 pages on religion, and 300 pages are translated. Maybe 100 or 150 pages are yet to be translated. But that is especially about religion. But in the prison notebooks, where there is no discussion of religion exclusively, he talks about religion. When there is no exclusive discussion of religion, he talks about religion only. Therefore, I see the prison notebooks on common sense, philosophy of praxis. It's full of propositions on Christianity, on Protestantism, on Catholicism, on history of Christianity in medieval era and modern era. So therefore, the whole Gramsci's prose is full of insights about religion. Quite surprising that Gramscian scholars have tried to take essence of his political and social theory from his ideas dealing with religious context, yet there is no reference to religious context at all. And as I said, there is a hidden bias in the Gramsci scholarship. They assume that religion is a dogmatic, superstitious phenomena, not to be studied, not to be grasped by people like Marxists. So Marxism is supposed to be critical of. In fact, one of your teachers once challenged me in private. I will not share the name. So why Marxists should work on religion? I said, and why Gramsci should write on religion? I said, Gramsci is already dead. What is the point of asking the question? I have to ask this question: why Gramsci has written on religion? What is the point of asking question? Why Gramsci should write on religion? What should is immaterial because Gramsci has written. Question is why he has written, and that is important rather than why he should write and why he should study his theory of religion. These biases are there in the Marxist camp. As a result, Marxism has lost its relevance in the eyes of people across the world because religion is essentially, as Gramsci argues, gives us a practical conception of life. Religion is not about religion is about superstition, but religion is about our attitude towards religion, towards nature, our attitude towards each other, our attitude towards ourselves. Therefore, religion connects us with nature, self, and others. Three important units of our life. Religion, therefore, is all embracing philosophy or viewpoint. It encompasses not merely self and others, also nature. And if you don't examine that, you create a situation of alienation for yourself. The project of emancipation will never cut across the eyes. And therefore, that's the important question. Gramsci is interested in religion as one who is interested in developing a project of emancipation, how people try to liberate themselves from varieties of oppression. From this point of view, I told you that a lot of bias in the Gramsci camp as well. Marxist camp, Gramsci camp, tremendous bias, tremendous orthodoxy, and tremendous rigidity in understanding religious phenomena. Christianity, Hinduism, everywhere you find tremendous bias. There is no connection with the religious social imaginary and the Marxist social or political theory. So Gramsci is interested in that religion gives us three important sources of knowledge. One, it gives us ideology. Second, it gives us ethics. It gives us hegemony. Therefore, religion is a political project. Religion is also gives us a viewpoint, ideological viewpoint. Religion gives us moral, intellectual resources. Therefore, religion provides multiple sources of knowledge. This is the central point of Gramsci. Therefore, it is necessary for us to study a phenomena that gives us ideology, that gives us ethics, that gives us intellectuals, that gives us hegemony. Therefore, ideology that is a phenomena that gives us all these things must be studied critically, must be studied, examined critically, must seriously, critically. If you don't do it, you are creating conditions of theory that stay aloof from a phenomena which is very widespreadly popular in the camp of civilian population. And you stay away from their social imaginary, a theory which is stays away from the social imaginary of ordinary people. As Ghana was telling us in the last class, you beg trouble. Theory must stay connected with social imaginary people. Theory must not be built by alienating itself from the rich resource of knowledge which a phenomenon has produced. Religion as a phenomena, has produced rich resource of knowledge. Therefore, if you stay away from that, knowledge which is oppressive, knowledge which is liberative, knowledge which is connected to nature, self and other, each, and as I said, knowledge which is based on ideology, which has produced ideology, knowledge which has produced ethical and moral doctrines, intellectual doctrines, knowledge which has produced political power, and knowledge which has produced hegemonic principles. Therefore, if you stay away from all these, how will you build a democratic society? An intellectual who stays away from a phenomena as popular as religion will be building his ideology or her ideology like a caste system. Gramsci repeatedly said that intellectual who stays away from the social imaginary of ordinary people or middle class or even rich will be acting like a caste system, a caste based system, and therefore once you build a caste system for yourself, you are outcasting yourself. Therefore, there's no point in connecting with you. People will disown you. That's how it happened to Marxism throughout the world. Therefore, that's the reason why many people are showing interest in Gramsci. But point is, when they are showing interest in Gramsci, they adopt Gramsci's perspective, etc., etc. Yet they are silent on religion. The Gramsci draws his perspectives on hegemony, civil society, political party, intellectual, common sense, philosophy from religious phenomena. It's very sad that Gramscian scholars have not paid attention to that. Therefore, one author says even the scholars who champion Gramsci studies think that religion is a superstitious phenomena. They're worth ignoring it. Despite Gramsci writing about that, people still ignore his reference to religious phenomena while they talk about hegemony or intellectual formation. You will see the textbooks on all this. For example, I have sent you Roger Simon's work. You see the chapter on hegemony. Has he referred to religion? See the chapter on intellectual. Find out has he referred to religion? No. That's what I'm saying. When Gramsci himself talks about hegemony in context of religion, Gramsci himself talks about intellectual moral doctrines in context of religion. You write chapters on intellectual, civil society, political party, education, hegemony, without any reference to religion. Absolutely nothing. This is what the Gramscian scholarship has entered into a trap. Therefore, even a trap of orthodoxy, assuming that religious phenomena has no impact on life, it is partly a hugely superstitious phenomena, like the classical Marxism, which assumed that to some extent, not classical, actually, Marxism of the middle era assumed that. Therefore, to say that is actually practically going contrary to the spirit of Gramsci's unorthodox, open-ended Marxism. So we discussed the ontological or anthropological classification of religion in the last class, which means three forms of religion: idea of personal God, idea of impersonal God, and the idea of animism or naturalism. We discussed this. I will tell you the political significance of it. First, let us understand the classification. Second classification, which I call sociological, or we can call it epistemological classification, because here religion is divided in terms of the knowledge framework and the framework of agency responsible for this worldview. Therefore, when you define religion in terms of worldview of an agency and classify it, you are likely to find four or five forms of religion. One, first, the elementary level is religious common sense, which we discussed in the last class. As I said, common sense, I told you, could be religious and non-religious. You read the chapter on the last chapter in the first selection of prison notebooks, philosophy of praxis. Gramsci argues that the that common sense could be non-religious as well as religious. Very clearly, therefore, as a common sense, religious, but religious common sense, which remains a bedrock of religious phenomena. So the base of religious phenomena is inherent in religious common sense. Like common sense, religious common sense is also full of contradiction. Is a conception of immediate life. It tries to articulate original thinking, and even when it sides with hegemony, it gives its own color, it gives its own shade, it contributes to hegemony rather than imitate hegemony. That's the important point that comes in next. Therefore, that's about common sense. Therefore, the same thing is valid for religious common sense. What I told you about common sense remains valid for religious common sense. And I have discovered in my own fieldwork, I found that I will tell you later. And there is one second aspect of which you discuss this point. I will not get back to it again and again. Second point is just above religious common sense in the hierarchy of religious knowledge. You have this phenomena called folk religion or folk culture. So, which is a bit more organized than religious common sense, and which we discussed, which we were talking about in the last class. I gave example of Daskatya, Odia Daskatya or Telugu Harikatha. You find ordinary people participating in these activities and they similarly Baul culture of Bengal, and some many popular cultures throughout India. You take Bihu dance, take Chow dance, take Mohiniyattam, take even there are Sanskritized folk cultures like Mohiniyattam. We find popular elements present there. So you find varieties of folk activities take place through India. Folk activities is a bit more organized than religious common sense. Religious common sense is widespread and they may be rampant across cultures, but folk culture may not be rampant across cultures. Folk culture may be regional, may be local. Whereas the religious common sense on the basis of which their folk culture is built may be widespread across space and time. I'll give an example. Say, take the Chow dance. Take, for example, Savari, actually, it's called, I tell you, I forget. Shiva Parvati dance. Shiva Parvati dance in Chow dance or in Danda dance in Odisha has a different kind of folk legends. Then, similar Shiva Parvati dance in North India or Kashi or in Kerala. But the idea of Shiva Parvati, there is a Shiva and there is a Parvati is common across cultures. The Shiva Parvati, the iconic figures are common across culture, and some commitment to the norms of activities conducted by Shiva Parvati may be common across cultures, yet that Shiva Parvati legend has adapted in different dance forms across India vary from culture to culture. Ram Katha of, of UP is not same as Ram Katha of Odisha. Though the story of Ram is present in both the Kathas. Therefore, Gramsci, these things are not there in Gramsci. I have done some research on this, but Gramsci would say that unlike religious common sense, whose beliefs are widespread, like common sense, as he says, is widespread belief. It cuts across space and time, cuts across cultural fault lines or cultural divisions in a nation or a civilization culture. But that little more organized forms of expression of, of religious common sense is not so popular throughout space and time. It has essentially a locus standi in a restricted space and time. So therefore, that's the important point. Therefore, that folk culture or folk dance is a more organized expression of activities carried out by ordinary people in a community life. Been doing for centuries together. For example, Chow dance. The tribes of Western Odisha or the North Odisha have been doing for centuries, in Bengal and Odisha. So Danda dance of South Odisha, which is practiced in districts of Puri, Ganjam, Fulbani. Actually, they essentially activity restricted to these three districts, not throughout Odisha. So Harikatha is only known in coastal areas of Andhra Pradesh. Mohiniyattam is only part of the coastal Kerala. Therefore, gradually it has spread, but when the spread of these activities is limited, it's not spread to, so far, not spread too far, For example, Mohiniyattam has not crossed over to Karnataka. Similarly, Bihu dance has not crossed over to Bengal. And similarly, the Baisakhi dance in Punjab has not crossed over to Bhangra dance Punjab, not crossed over to Odisha. Odias don't know Bhangra, I can't dance. So the point is, we are all part of our culture. We are all creatures of our culture. We are a product of our culture. Therefore, this Gramsci argues that folk culture is restricted in time and space, whereas religious common sense is widespread across time and space. it could represent especially the ethos of a civilization, religious common sense, where folk culture did not. Folk culture represents organized expression of activities conducted by several communities together or in isolation from each other, and they operate in a restricted time and space. Therefore, unlike religious common sense, folk culture is more an organized activity. It's not a spontaneous activity. It's a more organized activity, consciously practiced by small communities throughout a civilization. Throughout. This point, I'm saying that with march of modernization, capitalism, etc., folk culture may disappear, but that assumption has gone wrong because, as you said, folk culture has revived extensively with the help of modernization, help of capital, money. Folk culture is revived. It has suffered a bit, but revived extensively, and it has stayed in Italy as well. Therefore, in Gramsci's own homeland, folk culture has not vanished, and not disappeared. And moreover, in the era of modernity, different kinds of folk activities are discovered by modern people. So, for example, you must have seen the tomato dance in Italy. The smash tomato, everywhere, the jump and fall. That's fun. That's not there in medieval era, and that is invented by modern people because they produce tomato on mass scale. The surplus available now, and they want to spend energy on dancing on tomato. Couples jump there, they paint each other. This is probably a modern activity. Therefore, to say that folk culture disappeared with the march of modernity, capitalism, is not correct. A particular form of folk culture may disappear, but the folk content disappear again in different forms. So therefore, Gramsci says something that folk culture may disappear. That's wrong. But his analysis of folk culture that is essentially a activity locally experienced by people, organized activity of communities, locally experienced by people to make them happy, to recall good things from the past, to recall they are the activities done by folk activities. Therefore, these activities, Gramsci's point that folk culture is a organized expression of a particular time and space, that point remains substantially valid despite his assumption gone wrong. And folk culture can play a progressive role and can play a reactionary role. I will get back, describe that later. First, let me tell you the classification. Third point is about popular religion. Popular religion, religion of people, religion of people is a bit more organized than folk culture. Therefore, hierarchically, religious common sense the bottom. Then above that you have folk culture or folk religion. Then above that you have religion of people, which is much more organized and led by intellectuals. Folk culture may not be led by powerful intellectuals, intellectual leaders or saints or religious gurus. The popular religion is led by intellectual gurus. Therefore, there is a gigantic effort put by intellectuals here. Gramsci gives several examples. Take, for example, Martin Luther. He led a popular revolt against Christianity, against the medieval church, against the Catholic domination, and led a revolt of peasants. They went underground and sacrificed their life. Many were killed. Luther himself would have died several times, survived. And therefore, but it produced a reformation of Christianity and made one thing clear for Christians that now we can study our Bible through our mother tongue. That message and many other messages we can also connect with God directly without help of priestly class, without visiting church. Now, several ideas came. Bibles were translated into various languages, and they made use of printing press, which was invented at the time around 1515. So, therefore, Martin Luther's movement around 1515, he planted his list of demands in the church gate in Germany, and he went underground and survived for a long period. Therefore, but he was a powerful intellectual leader. He inspired a new generation of ideas. Inspired, though he was underground, he was a powerful underground activist, an intellectual activist who was underground. And destabilized church that led to large-scale reformation of the Catholic Church, which tried to control state, tried to, and moreover, because of Martin Luther movement, the separation of church from state happened. Without Martin Luther fighting for reformation of Catholic Church, he was a Catholic priest himself. Without him fighting for this, he would not have got secular states, secular democracy in Europe. The church got separated because of initiatives by Martin Luther movement, led by Calvinism later, they led to counter-revolution, etc. But it's because of Martin Luther's initiative, this secularization of society, secularization of state power began, church control over state declined, and church clearly underlined the difference between the state and church itself. Otherwise, people would have rejected church, Catholic Church, long back. He would have simply met its nemesis. They agreed, but it took a lot of struggle, a lot of fight. Catholic Church was very hesitant to, in fact, it was very ruthless. It took the help of state power to kill many Protestants. They died. They were killed, massacred. The killing of, butchering of people happened mass scale, which India has never witnessed. Kind of war, terrible wars happened. Europe witnessed terrible wars, holy wars. They called holy wars during that period. Holy wars, people fought for each other, over each other for 50 years, 100 years, 150 years. Unbelievable wars. Such wars have never happened on India's soil, India's history. India's history, you don't find holy war. No war taking place over 50 years. Sporadic wars, fights here and there, fine, but war over 2 years, maybe. For example, the battle between Rana Pratap and Akbar, that could have lasted maybe 10 years. Not, there is no holy war lasting over centuries. Europe experienced holy wars, terrible wars actually, because of this rigidity of Catholic Church and the kind of fight that led to killing a massacre of people. Civilizations were killed. Many millions were butchered. This kind of thing unparalleled in India's history. So you keep that history in mind, but try to understand the history. Gramsci argues that therefore this is how Protestant movement initiated large-scale reform. Therefore, this is a movement of people fighting against Catholic domination, fighting for separation of state from church, fighting for translation of Bible into their mother tongue, fighting for direct mediation with God without help of the church, with the help of the priestly class. If necessary, the soul searching. The Protestant emphasize soul searching. Therefore, it invoked the idea of what I would call impersonal God. The classical Protestant movement invoked, Martin Luther himself invoked the idea of impersonal God. God is a resident member of my heart, my soul, my chest. My chest carries my soul, my heart carries my God. Why is it go to you the priest? I don't care. That delegitimized priest class. Therefore, there are ferocious fight against attempt to delegitimize them, against attempt to counter hegemony, them trying to attack the hegemonic domination of the Catholic priest, the nobility, feudal classes. They led to bitter fight across Europe. But Gramsci argues that this is how the Protestant movement is an expression of religion of people. It initiated what Gramsci calls Gramsci's favorite phrase, moral intellectual reformation of Catholic religion, of Christianity. Because Catholicism symbolized the entire Christianity. Heretic movements were there. For example, St. Francis movement was there in the 9th century. Gramsci argues that, but it didn't become a popular movement. It was an interesting movement that actually it inspired Martin Luther. Martin Luther drew inspiration from the heretic tradition of St. Francis movement, challenging the Catholic domination. That heretic movement led by St. Francis in the 9th century. Martin Luther came in the 16th century, 1515, time when Machiavelli was writing his Prince. Same time, Uh, so therefore, Gramsci argued that the Protestant movement initiated his favorite phrase is what he calls intellectual moral reformation of religious dogma. Gramsci, wherever he noticed, therefore he says the lesson we learn, socialists must learn lesson from Protestant movement. Socialism is supposed to be a Protestant movement led by people of the world, demanding intellectual, moral reformation of hegemonic systems. In medieval era, hegemonic system was dominated by Christianity. In the modern era, hegemonic system dominated by capitalism. Therefore, the task of socialism is to do similar task which Protestant movement carried against Catholic domination. Intellectual, moral reformation of religion was carried out by Martin Luther. Similarly, Marx and Engels, Gramsci argues, they did believe in carrying out intellectual moral reformation. Intellectual moral is a pair, I will come to it later. Intellectual slash moral. Gramsci uses his pairing. His pairs are very interesting and very confusing. If you miss out them, you will miss out. So intellectual slash moral. Intellectual slash moral reformation. Socialism must initiate in the era of capitalism. That is what Marx and Engels outlined new philosophy by drawing inspiration from religion of people led by Martin Luther. Religion of people can be stressed to different paths. Gramsci also talks about the birth of Christianity. So look at the birth of Christianity. It is also a religion of people. It was not a religion of the elites, not a religion led by very high-fi people, not religion led by nobles, landlords, or zamindars. A religion led by ordinary people, the fisherman, the shepherd, the boatman. Five of them, priests, five classical priests of Christianity. Jesus himself, Peter, others. They all came from this class. Jesus was shepherd. Peter was fisherman. And somebody, I forget the name. He was a boatman. No, these people came together. They opposed the domination that opposed slavery practiced by slavery justified by religious dogmas. Religious priests justified slavery. Kings brought slaves. Traders engaged in slavery. So early Christianity was a revolt against slavery. Challenged religious orthodoxies justifying slavery. Challenged political orthodoxy justifying slavery. Challenged economic orthodoxy practicing slavery. Therefore, that led most of them went underground. Jesus faced the hostility openly. He was unwilling to go underground, and he was finally assassinated or crucified. But the point is, that's how the early Christianity emerged as a religion of people. Ordinary people fought for intellectual, moral reformation of social system called slavery. That gave rise to, if you recall, many people say that there are no Hinduism, and Hinduism was invented by Arabian people. But they also forget that Christianity was invented by Jews. They don't say that. Christianity also not invented by Christians. Christianity was invented by Jews. The Jew was an old religion. Judaism was existing for that. The Jew traders who were roaming around Italy found people worshipping different things. They called them Christians. Even Christianity was coined by Jewish traders, just as Arabian traders apparently coined Hinduism for us. I am 100% sure same thing must be true for even Islam. Therefore, this classical religion, Islam is a more new religion. There are old religions like Hinduism, Christianity. I'm sure that it could be true for Judaism as well. They were invented by others, not by themselves. They are not self-expressions. Jesus didn't say that his religion is Christianity. Peter didn't say that he's professing Christianity in Rome, in Turkey, in Constantinople. Therefore, this how similarly Hinduism were not a self-description of Hindus. They believed in different activities, and they never called themselves Hindus. So it be. That is true for Christianity, that is true for Hindus as well. Then many people talk about what they say about Hindu, they don't say about Christianity. Christianity is also invented by non-Christians. Just as Hinduism is coined by non-Hindus. Therefore, and B. Savarkar admits that. So therefore, what is important for us to understand that that a phenomena might acquire a self-description from outside. Outsider may describe a phenomena which is owned by the community, the insider, but doesn't mean that it takes away the essence of the phenomena. The essence of the phenomena doesn't change just because the naming is now done by outsider. It's a point, simple point missed out by most of the commentators from India and abroad. Talking about Hinduism, talking about, they don't even say that Christianity is not invented by Christians. The Christianity was invented by non-Christians. So this is a duplicity of secular intellectuals. Let us not discuss them further. Point is, what is important for us to note that a description of a phenomena doesn't change just because it is named by somebody else. Now, the phenomena continues to be same, and it moves on its own rhythm, despite is now named by somebody else as Hindu or Christian. Now, that's how it happened to popular religion in Christianity. Gramsci notes the rise of Jesus as an intellectual leader of early Christianity, representing religion of people, ordinary people. Similarly, Gramsci notes that Martin Luther is a modern leader who represented modern forms of Christianity and tried to connect Jesus Christ with millions of hearts of millions of people in the Western world and challenge the institutional forms of religion which Christianity has assumed in the era of Catholic domination, and thereby the people, religion of people led by Martin Luther articulate the idea of impersonal God. As I said, the idea of impersonal God is the idea of God that resides in the hearts of millions of us. That actually triggered Rousseau. That actually helped Machiavelli to design a new concept of religion. That helped many people they draw inspiration from Martin Luther, and they adopted similar stances in subsequent centuries of Europe. So, Gramsci, this is a religion of people. A religion of people is essentially organized expression of people protesting against hegemonic religion or hegemonic system. Could be slavery, could be Catholic Church, there could be state dominating over people because of church dominating state. Could varieties of could be demanding translation of messages of God in the mother tongue. So therefore, many varieties of demands come up. But religion of the people again appears in different forms, in different era. In the early period, it appeared in one form. Early period of Christianity appeared in one form, and subsequent period it appeared in different form. In each form, one thing is common: essentially revolt against orthodoxy. Religion of people is essentially revolt against hegemonic culture practiced by a society or a religious strata. The early Christianity was revolt against slavery and religious orthodoxy. Similarly, the Martin Luther's revolt was revolt against Catholic orthodoxy, also revolt against control of state by church. Therefore, it is revolt for secularization. Therefore, led to democratization of political life. And also it challenged the feudal control of state power. Therefore, it was anti-feudal by nature. Like the Jesus Christ movement was a movement against slavery for freedom. Similarly, Martin Luther's movement was a movement against feudalism, nobility, aristocracy, domination of clergy over the life of ordinary people. and tried to redefine Christianity altogether in new jargon, and brought back the Franciscan spirit. Say that God resides in my heart alone. Therefore, I'm saying that the religion of people by nature or popular religion, that can be said in a telegraphic expression. Popular religion by nature is emancipatory. It confronts the powerful dogmas of the time. There could be social dogmas, could be economic dogmas, could be uh, religious dogmas. It challenges powerful dogmas of the time. Therefore, popular religion essentially emancipatory and egalitarian. Hmm. Then the complex theory comes. Gramsci's take on religion of intellectual. This is a very complex theory, and I will tell you how it is complex. Religion of intellectual is usually considered by scholars as as orthodoxy, as a elite controlled religion. But Gramsci does so in several passages in prison notebooks. But when he talks about the reformation initiated by Catholic Church after 1890, he offers a different classification of religion of intellectual. The religion intellectual is usually seen as hegemonic intellectual, a hegemonic religious system or hegemonic system, trying to control power by to control people through religious dogmas and so on and so forth. But towards the end of his discussion of religion, considers that even religion of intellectual could be seen as left wing, right wing, and centrism. Could be seen as, therefore, he offers a flexible understanding of religion of intellectual toward the end of his discussion, as he notices that Catholic Church has reinvented its wheels after 1890. So let me describe this. Religion of intellectual, for Gramsci, is a more hegemonic thing. Tries to control people, tries to control political life, tries to control social life, tries to control economic life, justify through religious doctrines, through moral doctrines, intellectual justification. It's done by organized groups. Catholic Church is a particular phenomena that belongs to intellectual religion. Similarly, Brahminical tradition in India could be seen as a phenomena representing intellectual religion. Mm, and so similarly, the Mullah tradition could be seen as a phenomena representing intellectual religion. So similarly, the Sikh clergies represent intellectual religion. You find intellectual religion that tries to control people, tries to control resources, tries to control economic life of ordinary people, and dominate them by preaching religious and intellectual doctrines, and try to control their life by co-opting them to accept those religious and moral doctrines. So Gramsci says that the main function of religion intellectual is to contribute to hegemony, contribute to control mechanisms over ordinary people's life. The control can be economic, political, social, cultural, and also religious. But it's done through religious format. Therefore, it's called religion of intellectual. As Gramsci says, just a religious common sense could be non-religious and religious. So, as religion of intellectual, the intellectual hegemony could be religious and non-religious. So, the intellectual hegemony, which is religious, is known as religious intellectual religion or religion of intellectual. So, that's what. Therefore, this is the one thing. And as Gramsci says that if you look at the history of Catholicism, it has could not face the challenge from Protestant movement. Protestant movement got gradually popular throughout Europe, and it was acceptable to large number of people. Large number of kings accepted, and kings ousted Catholic Church from their life because Church was controlling them, dictating them, and they found liberation in accepting Protestant ethics. So Protestant ethics was accepted by the kings. It helped them to stay away from the control by the church. So it had the separation of church from political life, in a king's control. So king became the sole arbiter of political rule and no more guided by the Bible or by the church from outside. So therefore, kings accepted this. As kings accepted, it became popular with people. Similarly, business class accepted because business class found that attractive that why waste money in Catholic ceremonies were highly consuming their economic energies. So austerity was important principle for business class. The early business class practiced austerity in order to accumulate more and more wealth. So therefore, they got attracted by austerity. The austerity became a new norm, new normal activity practiced by Protestant religious gurus. Martin Luther himself argued for austerity and lavish spending on ceremonies, which are actually helping the Catholic Church, Catholic clergies. Therefore, that actually attracted a business class. They said, okay, if we maintain austerity, we can accumulate more wealth. And we need more wealth to do more business, to spread out business across time and space. So therefore, the new business class, which was doing trade, business, sea trade, etc., across the world, they got attracted to Protestant movement. The claim for austerity, the slogan for austerity, caught their attention. So therefore, many people got many different classes got attracted. Peasants got attracted for Bible being known in their language. The business class got attracted for the slogan of austerity, less ceremonious rituals in order to achieve the God's messages in their real life. God's messages are now simply available through without many elaborate ceremonies. They simplified, Protestant movement simplified many interesting things, and for different classes, there are different slogans. The kings accepted for this for one reason, business people accepted Protestantism for one reason, and peasants accepted Protestant things for one reason. And for several reasons, several things are common to all these classes. Therefore, Protestant movement, as kings accepted Protestant ethics, it became popular across the kingdom and led to bitter fight, not easy for them to do it, but led to fight across as I told you, many holy wars were fought between kingdoms. But in process of the historical struggle, etc., Protestant movement came to a hegemonic position, and it ousted Catholic Church from its life. And as a result, Catholic Church was essentially a world conquering empire. It was trying to control entire Europe. Entire Europe was on the command of Catholic Church. And Ramsey says the Catholic Church united entire Europe. It is more a force of unity. And is a control hegemony through principles of unity. And it is so powerful, so ubiquitous, present everywhere. It controlled political, cultural life of peasants. However, that control was external. Because peasants will support Catholic Church, the Catholic clergy, for one reason. Like some of your students support some teachers who speak fluent, powerful English, and they don't understand that English. Oh, teacher is teaching very well. When they don't understand teacher is teaching, that's how peasants also connect with the clergy. They thought that clergy is talking something which you can't understand. Must be talking, he's talking very fluently and talking very powerfully. It's incomprehensible, but therefore it must be all right. So if teachers are incomprehensible, students think that, oh, teacher must be teaching very well. This is a fallacious. This is how our students are doing MA here are like peasants of Europe. They're not much different from peasants of Europe. They're more or less similar. So the point is, you must apply your mind to what you learn. You think what is incomprehensible for you is good, then only God can save you. The peasants, therefore, went to God in Catholic. They relied on God in the Catholic clergy. Like our students who bank on such teachers for their liberation. So also the peasants banked on such clergy for their emancipation. Without comprehending them, they used to go to them again and again. The clergy used to give spellbound speeches in the churches, in the community halls. And the peasants, they would do everything in Latin, not in Italy or Germany, but the peasants, without knowing Latin, they would go and, top, very good, top class. So incomprehensible teachers like incomprehensible clergies for the peasants of Europe. Now, this is a point Gramsci makes that Gramsci says that you try to communicate to people. You must do it in people's language. That's what the Protestant movement demanded. That the language of Bible, must be language of ordinary people, and that's how the Protestant movement won the hearts of millions of peasants across Europe. And Catholic Church got gradually alienated from peasantry, from traders, from business class, and from the kings, from the political authorities. So by 1880s, Catholic Church was essentially a kind of a cosmopolitan unit. Gramsci uses interesting. He says, look at the history of Catholicity. In one period, the Catholic clergy was the organic intellectual, because he was from the aristocratic class, and he was in charge of dissemination of Catholic religion and the peasantry. Peasantry relied on Catholic clergy as a source for knowledge without understanding it, without understanding much of it. Uh, Therefore, the connection between while the Catholic clergy is Gramsci calls him an organic intellectual of the feudal era, because Catholic clergy articulated the feudal culture of Catholic Church, control state, teach God's messages in Latin, in a language foreign to everybody else, so that they remain under control. So trying to control people through foreign discourse is very interesting use. That one says that Catholic clergy was relying on a foreign language to control people, and the people also fell for it. That happens to and I sympathize with European peasants, because when I see my students running after teachers whose English whose language they can't understand, I can well sympathize with the plight of the peasants of medieval Europe. Therefore, the story of this kind of thing, Gramsci documents them very vividly. You must read that essay. He says, what you find there, he says, the Catholic Church, Catholic clergy, he says, is the organic intellectual representing the feudal era. He represented because he was part of the feudal class, he outlined worldview of the feudal class, he carried that worldview to the peasants of the time, tried to control the peasantry by hegemonic discourses, etc. Therefore, he is intellectual, organic to feudal era. Therefore, Gramsci uses organic intellectual. Remember, I will come back to it when I talk about intellectual. He says the Catholic clergy is the organic intellectual of the feudal era, where he is from the class whose interest he articulates in public life, the life of the peasantry who constitute the masses of the feudal era. I think we'll stop here and get back to it. Take a break for take a break for 15 minutes. We'll resume around 12:55. Okay.